slide, please.
Hey, Nora, I think there might be a slight lag on your end. This right now shows the bag bill.
Okay.
Suzanne, can you see the bag bill on your screen?
Yes, I can. I think there just might be a slight delay, so no worries.
For Nora, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is showing the allowed alternatives for bags. Of course, the #1 goal is to get people to bring their own reusable bags. That's what we really want to do to reduce waste. And in order to motivate behavior change in that way, there's an 8-cent fee on the bags that are allowed. So no single-use plastic carryout bags. Stores and restaurants can provide large paper carryout bags that need to be made with 40% recycled content, as well as thick reusable plastic bags. Of course, we don't really want people to go for those thick reusable plastic bags, so we're hoping the 8-cent fee will motivate the behavior change to bring your own bag. Stores can provide these compostable bags if they're really clearly labeled and the right color to be clear to consumers. The Department of Ecology doesn't recommend that, since most facilities in the state don't accept those and they won't break down unless they're in an industrial facility. And the Seattle Aquarium actually advocated for that not being a recommended alternative because we looked at the science and saw that they don't break down in cold water environments. There was, for example, a study on sea turtle stomachs where we saw that compostable plastic bags behave similar to regular plastic bags. So that's just an example of looking at the science to try to figure out what kinds of specific policy requirements we want to include. The fee does not apply to customers using food assistance programs, and there are some other exemptions, but we're excited that this just went into effect and hoping that it makes a difference in terms of how many of these bags are used for just a few minutes and then thrown away and then ending up in the environment. Next slide, please. We obviously need to address more than just bags. So based on research that many of you do and others, we know more about what is being found out in the ocean and on beaches. So here are some of the items that we do see and which we work to address with legislation in the 2021 Washington State session. Next slide. So as we moved on past plastic bags, trying to do things that would have a broader reach, these are some of our goals. So where there are really problematic materials like expanded polystyrene foam that have clear alternatives, we wanted to ban those things. We wanted to get rid of unnecessary items. So like when you go to a restaurant getting takeout, you're going to take your food home where you have utensils. You don't need to have plastic utensils tossed into your bag, and getting rid of those can also save the businesses money. We wanted to help drive a market for recycled materials. So what's put in the bins at our homes will actually get recycled, that there will be a demand for that material to be turned into something new. And then we wanted to clear up confusion. Right now, there are these chasing arrow labels on a lot of products, which people think means they're recyclable, but that does not necessarily mean that. So we wanted to do what we could to reduce that confusion so that you don't have non-recyclables contaminating recycling streams. Next slide, please. So here is what we passed with our partners and legislative champions like Senator Doss and Representative Berry in Washington State this spring. So Heather, if you click a few times, it'll move around. So there's the expanded polystyrene ban. So no longer can you sell in Washington State food service packaging like clamshells or cups that are made with expanded polystyrene foam, no recreational coolers, and no plastic peanuts. The second one is that those items I mentioned, like single-use plastic utensils and straws and little packages of ketchup or mustard, will be available only on request. So anyone who really needs one can still get it, but they won't be automatically put in your takeout order or given to you, even if you're eating in. The number 3, like I mentioned, is the first step is just removing the requirement. Right now, previously it was required that manufacturers put that chasing arrow logo on their products with the resin number. And so we remove that requirement. So hopefully that's a step towards clearer labeling. And then the last piece is requiring that beverage containers, personal care products like shampoo, bottles, and trash bags be made with a minimum amount of post-consumer recycled plastic to help drive that demand for recycled content and make sure things actually get recycled. And then next slide, please. think this is the last one. So I just wanted to note that, we really are pushing hard on the policy side of things because it can make change happen quickly and at a pretty big scale. And doing things in Washington can help build momentum for things to happen across the country. And we really do use microplastic research whenever possible to help inform and support these policy efforts. So research is ongoing, but what we do have is helping us make the case and helping us inform how we do it. For example, when I testify in the Washington State Legislature, I often mention that Seattle Aquarium researchers and others are finding microplastics in every sample we collect. And it's ubiquitous, it's a local problem, it's not a far away problem, and we need to be addressing it right here in Washington State with policy change. The research on what kinds of plastics are being found also helps us target those policies and remember, for example, that polystyrene foam is a big visible problem on the beach, but it's not the only kind of plastic that researchers are finding. We need to think more about how to address microfibers, for example, that are found in the water column, and clothing is a different source of those microplastics than the packaging that we are working hard on right now. And then finally, those things about information about what we're finding out in the environment is helping us make sure we cover everything we need to cover. So Washington State was the first state to include lids, drink lids, in that on request piece, so that if you go get an iced coffee, you won't automatically have a plastic lid on top unless you are, really want one or are going to be driving somewhere and don't want to spill. So lids are one of the most common items found on beaches in Washington State and around the country. So that helped inform our work. Now I'll turn it over to Heather to talk more about the plastic and waste reduction challenge and some new big policy efforts.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll take a few questions afterwards, right, Suzanne, for these? Okay, cool. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Trim. I'm Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington, and our goal is to make trash obsolete in Washington State. And of course, we do work quite a bit with folks in Oregon. So nice to have a broad audience today. So I'm going to bring in the issue about recycling, because many of you are plastics researchers, but you may not be all the way up to snuff on all the recycling challenges we're facing. So I'm going to spend a little time on that context. So for starters, and I know many of you have seen this graph, this is a fabulous graph for talks, is to show that we really didn't have plastics in common use before World War II. This is from 1950 to 2015, showing the use and production of plastic all around the world in all sectors. And you can see the recession from 2007. And, when they pull this graph out past, 2020, I'm sure we're going to see very interesting tweaks up and down from the pandemic. So at the bottom, you can see plastics packaging, which is 30 to 40% of plastic, and I'll show you that in a sec. This is a projection out to the future, and basically the petrochemical industry is now really looking to plastic packaging and plastics as a way to shift their usage as we move away from energy and transportation. So we've got a big topic to tackle here. Now, as I mentioned, between 30 and 40% of plastics is used for packaging, and this is something we can easily tackle, as opposed to say your durable things like your glasses on your face and bigger things that have longer use. These are things that are used for just a few minutes, and it does include everything. The definition of packaging includes everything from the obvious things like the wrapper around your candy bar and bottles, but it does include the little stickers on your veggies. That is also part of the packaging definition. The big challenge we have, or one of them, is that the manufacturers have been shifting again and again to items that are not recyclable. Everything on this slide, these are all items that cannot be recycled in our current system, mainly because they're multi-material. That can on the bottom right, that's actually a plastic can connected to a metal top. That is not recyclable in our current system when things are multi-material. So in Washington, we have had this is over the past few years, you can see a 36% increase in the costs This is for the UTC, which is the Utilities and Transportation Commission areas of the state, which are basically the unincorporated areas of the state. But this exact same trend is happening throughout all of our cities and counties. And so we've had an increase in costs, a lessening of what people can recycle. Many cities have taken away things or gone all the way from recycling. And then overall, we had a really good trend on getting up to big recycling rates, and now we're in a decrease. And this is just really driving everybody crazy. Recovery, by the way, does include some incineration. We have one incinerator in Washington, but it's a very, very small percentage. These are two different graphs or two different maps of the exact same thing. Basically, what you're seeing here is access to residential recycling in Washington, curbside. And you can see that we have real divergence between different regions of the state. And I know the same thing is true in Oregon, which is why your new Oregon bill does address recycling across the state, but also for multifamily, which is another area where can be some real lags. So China, about 3 years ago, said no more plastic, no more waste coming our way from other countries. And the reason they did that, well, so for us in the Pacific Northwest, up to 60% of our bales were going to China, Southeast Asia, but primarily China. And that is because we are a deadhead situation. Container ships were coming into the port of Seattle and other ports, and were going home, they were coming in full and they were going home empty, mostly empty. So it was very, very inexpensive to ship a bale of plastics. It was cheaper to ship a bale of plastic waste from Seattle to China by boat than from Seattle to Portland, Oregon. And that is a really terrible dynamic from the perspective of greenhouse gases and from the perspective of us taking our waste to other countries. So it's created a reckoning for us. What they did is they specifically said that for 24 different types of commodities, there was going to be a 0.05 contamination standard, percent contamination standard. That is not a typo. That is 0.05. That is less than 1% contamination. And our bales were 11 to 20% contaminated. And when I use the word contamination in this case, this means the wrong material is in the wrong bale. So if it's a plastic bale, it might have metal, paper, food waste, and glass in it. So these are inspectors on the dock in China. And what they used to do was basically open up the container and the bales, they say, oh, looks good, send it right on into the country. Now what they do is they pull the bales off and they cut them open. If they find one thing, that 0.05 contamination standard, they will reject the entire container load and send it away. They also restricted the import licenses. There's a movie that you can, this movie was a pivotal movie for China. It was a documentary about the little mom and pop operations around the country, which were taking in the bales, cutting them open, using and processing the items that they could, that had value, that what the bale was supposed to be, and then burning or dumping the rest. You can watch a 3-minute trailer of this and get a really good idea. That's all you need to see of how bad this was. So the issue here is that China needed to clean up their own environment, and that's what they have done, or this is one of the steps they're taking. So this is not showing that. This is a military parade in Beijing. This is looking out of the CNN tower over Beijing on a day when they were having a parade, and they said all industry must shut down. And then 3 days later, it went back to normal. And you may recall during the Olympics, they did the same thing. They shut down industry. They have a major, major air pollution problem, as I'm sure you all are very aware. And getting the plastic waste to not be coming from other parts of the world and create their own circular economy is a step they took, an important step they took, and something that has actually been helpful, I think, for us, because it's created a reckoning that we can kind of basically need to revamp our systems here, look more seriously. So it precipitated a recycling crisis. Some things have rebounded, but people say, so what is actually holding value? So what is holding value and held value more or less to the system and going up and down, because these are essentially commodities, so they do go up and down with market demand. Were your glass, your cans, your #1 PET bottles that are in the lower left-hand side, which are your soda and water bottles. And then your number 2 plastics, which is HDPE, which is things like your milk jugs and your laundry detergent jugs. The interesting thing is that paper, which I'm not showing on the slide, is the economic driver for the recycling system. It is the bulk of the material going in, and thus it's the most valuable. Before China did their China Sword, their initiative, the value of paper, mixed paper bales, was over $100 for a ton. During that sort of first year when the crisis hit, it went down to 34, and then it went down to negative 30. Or 40, it was something like that. In other words, it was the recycling facilities were having to spend money to transport the bales essentially for free to the pulp and paper mills here. Now, paper has rebounded since then, and other things have rebounded as well. So the crisis in terms of the end markets has somewhat abated, but it really was a wake-up call for people. Plus the fact that there's so many things we can't recycle. Now, people say, well, why bother? Why don't we just landfill it all? And of course, I know that as scientists, you all are going to be like, no, 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 no. And you're looking at it from the point of view of escaped trash going out into the environment. But really, from an environmental perspective, it makes a lot of sense to recycle things, both from a resource extraction and all the consumption and all that, and in particular because of energy. So this is a group, ISRI, which does a great job of tracking. They update this on a pretty regular basis. I think this is from 2019, this particular graph, but you can see that, you know, aluminum's best, which you would probably already know from the bauxite mines and all that, but plastic is number 2 in terms of the value, energy saving if you recycle, and then you can see other commodities on here as well. As Nora mentioned, we have a coalition of groups in Washington State that are working on reducing plastics, and these are some of the leader groups that you can see across the bottom here. And we have 2 main goals. The first is, let's reduce the use of unnecessary plastics, and she mentioned also toxics, problematic plastics. And then let's build markets and restore our recycling system and create jobs here in the Pacific Northwest. I'll be more broad here because actually we are a region and we do share facilities. So what happened in Washington is in 2019, Senator Rolfes led a bill that resulted in a study. And this study was looking at what can we do with to deal with the responsible management of plastic packaging. And the study was produced last year by the Department of Ecology, contracting it out. And it had 10 recommendations. I'm not going to read them all to you, but the top 3 were to do a extended producer responsibility, and I'll explain that in a minute, for all materials, not just plastics, a deposit return system for beverage containers. Washington doesn't have one, Oregon has the best in the country, and also do recycled content for plastic packaging. So as Nora said, you know, the bill that we just passed in Washington did have recycled content requirements. And what I'm about to talk about is the producer responsibility bill that we're working on in Washington. So in the recycling system, there are basically 4 key areas where we need to intervene in order to basically fix the system. And you can see them here. So on number 1 is systematic regeneration and collaboration. And this gets to the idea that we need to redesign our products so they can actually be recyclable. We need communication and collaboration among all the players, and we need the whole system to work smoothly. Number 2 is public education. The public is super confused. We need to make it a lot easier for the public so that they know what goes in, what does not go in, and you have one list across a state or a region, so people are very clear and understand. And what we see is that people are told why it's important to put something in or not put something in. They are more likely to not put the thing in that you don't want them to put in. For example, plastic bags should not go in the recycling at the curbside. Then infrastructure improvements. We basically had 2 decades of sending things to China and not upgrading our facilities here. And then finally, recycled content. So this is basically supply, number 1 through 3, and then number 4 is demand. So the bill that we worked on last year included demand, recycled content to help provide the value for the resin so it can help pull that drive. And what we're working on right now with the new bill and what you all just passed in Oregon addresses the supply side. So the bill we're working on is packaging product stewardship. It is where the manufacturers pay for the end of life of the materials. And this is not a new thing. This map shows in blues, different shades of blue, product stewardship for packaging and paper products that have been in place for decades or are underway. And you can see that the United States is still gray here. But in Germany, it started in the early 90s, and all of Europe has had it for decades. So this is not a new thing. And all the major corporations have been paying money for the recycling systems and redesigning their products in other countries and not here. So last year, we had 11 states that introduced product stewardship bills for packaging. And pleased to say that you all in Oregon did one of the bills, and so did Maine. And we are now working on one in Washington for our January session coming up. So again, the manufacturers and brand owners pay for a program that manages the packaging and paper products at the end of life. That is what this bill fundamentally is. And by the way, what Senator Merkley will mention as part of the Break Free from Plastic Act when he gets on at 9. So the Washington model is based partly on the Recycle BC, that's British Columbia model. They now have an 85% recovery rate, they just announced. So, but there are some flaws and we're looking to improve it. And a fundamental part of the bill is not only to do the product stewardship component, but also to set a very, very strong target, which says that all packaging and printed products must be reusable, recyclable, or compostable no later than January 1, 2030. This is a really important thing from the environmentalist point of view. We've got to get the stuff redesigned. And this matches the California initiative that is on the ballot for November 2022. So lastly, the bill has components that are addressing these other very important things. One is worker safety and worker labor conditions. Two is getting toxic substances out of the packaging. We are not saying that you can incinerate or use plastic for fuel. That would not count as recycling. We want verified end markets. We need truth in labeling so that the consumers are not confused. What they see and it says you can recycle, that means you really can recycle it. And also designing for litter prevention. So we're shifting the cost from the ratepayer to the manufacturer. That's the goal. And I want to say one more thing. So another policy. That was a statewide policy, but I want to mention that we are also working at the local level, helping support local city councils and community members. And Bellingham passed an ordinance earlier this year that says that restaurants and food establishments may only use durables in-house. So only real plates, real silverware, no plastic, no to-go. The to-go material must only be compostable, and the hotels may not have little mini shampoos and conditioners. They must be the larger size. And Bainbridge, Nora is working on one in Bainbridge Island right now. It's on deck, so I won't get into that because it's still on deck, but this is something we are also looking for at the local level to help them get to the state level eventually. So the goal is prevent, bring your own bag, bring your own coffee mug, then reuse and repair, then recycling, and lowest, and what we really don't want to do is burn it or when that's recovery, and we definitely don't want to send it to the landfill. And of course, we don't want it going out in the environment. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather and Nora. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and create some breakout rooms. And if you've noticed, I've posted in the chat a link to a Google Doc, as well as a link to some prompt questions that Heather and Nora have come up with. And so these are meant to stimulate discussion in the breakout rooms. And there'll be approximately 9 to 10 people in each room. Please remember to assign someone, hopefully someone will volunteer to be a note taker, and then just jot down your ideas. No need to format them, just whatever you come up with is fantastic. And Nora and Heather and myself and Stacy and other group leaders will sort of rotate amongst the rooms. And we'll do this for 10 minutes and then come back for a brief discussion before Senator Merkley joins us at 9.
Okay, I opened all the rooms.
Perfect, thank you.
Suzanne. Hey,
Yes.
this is Elise.
Yes.
I'm gonna hop off. I'll be back. I have to run. I have to bike Noah to school, and then I'll be back.
Okay.
Okay.
Good luck.
So I'm gonna miss the breakout room. Sorry.
Stay dry.
Okay, thanks. See you in a while.
And whoever just joined from Oregon Coast Aquarium, we are getting ready to go to breakout rooms. So I am going to assign you to a room that has the least amount of people. Okay, so James and Scott are still in here. Maybe they stepped away for a minute.
Yeah, that's possible. There's always a few people who don't want to do the breakout rooms, and that's fine. But yeah, we don't have quite as much time as I was thinking we would, which is okay. We can adapt, and it looks like everyone's got the Google Doc thing up and running, and there's lots of entries. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, you can see the Google Docs?
Yeah, if you just click on the link in the chat, you can see people populating it. I'm anonymous hippo, apparently. Everyone gets assigned different animals. So you've got anonymous blobfish.
I want to be a blobfish.
It would be kind of fun. Maybe we'll get reincarnated as one. Yeah, thanks for fixing the recording. I thought it was on, but
Oh, we should probably shut it off, pause it now, huh?
oh, we can cut out this part.
Okay.
That's what Kate did last time. She just cut out the middle part when people were in breakout rooms. Do you want to close the rooms at 8:50 and then just have a few minutes for main points?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
good.
Seattle Aquarium people are having difficulties here.
Hmm.
So Allison, I see that you just joined. We are working in breakout rooms to address a couple of different questions. So I'm going to assign you to a room here so you can join.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
Catherine, well,
Hello.
I'm going to assign you to a room, okay?
Thanks, I am late.
That's okay.
I went ahead and sent a broadcast message to everyone to let them know we're going to close the rooms at 8:50.
So we can close them at 8:49 because it gives them a minute to get in here. And that gives us an extra minute to buy back. I don't see Brian on here. He was getting on a couple of times. There he is again. Hey, Brian, we have 3 minutes left in the breakout room. Do you want to join one of those or just hang out here?
No, sorry, computer kept freezing up. I had to update Zoom.
Glad I came in then.
Glad it was recorded.
I feel that happens to me every Monday morning.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information, good information and good goals to work towards. And some solid, tangible solutions. So
Great.
So Warren, you just joined us. We are ending the breakout rooms here in just a few minutes. So everybody will be back and reporting back in, and then we will have Senator Merkley speaking.
Okay, thanks.
Suzanne, I've been trying to catch and mute people as well. So
Sounds good. Yeah,
trying
same.
to admit mute.
I was having trouble finding the one when we first started the meeting in the list. All right, I'm going to go ahead and the rooms because it'll give everyone 60 seconds once I do.
Okay.
After 2 years, I finally figured out Zoom, I think.
We have 10 seconds left and they should all be back.
Sounds good. Hey, welcome back, everyone. I realize we didn't have a lot of time for in-depth discussions, but hopefully everyone had a chance to at least briefly talk about the great presentations we heard from Heather and Nora. I haven't had a chance to look at the Google Doc yet, but does anyone want to report back from their group on what they discussed about state level state level solutions or approaches to recycling, to reducing plastic waste. And I love the emphasis on upstream solutions in both talks.
I can jump in.
Sure, wonderful. Go ahead.
I was breakout group 5. So we had a really great discussion. We actually couldn't get to the last question, unfortunately, but we did have some really great in-depth discussions on the first 2. And so the first one where we talked about, I'm just going to pull up the notes so I can make sure I get it, about how our overuse of microplastic pollution shifted. Well, we actually had an expert in the room, Ezra. Z wanted to mention that she had done a really great study that had looked at San Francisco Bay, and that a lot of the things that she saw, that Z saw, was around the higher wear particles entering the bay much more than what we might think of as untreated water, untreated runoff water. So that's a bit of a paradigm shift around people thinking a lot of the contaminants, a lot of the microplastic coming from the wastewater, where really the data supports its higher wear particles. And then that brought us into the next question, which was about how we hope the research we are doing or tracking will inform and influence policy efforts. Well, then we got into a really really interesting deep discussion around, okay, we are focusing more right now on the to-go packaging, whereas we're still seeing fibers and other problematic pieces of plastic in our environments. And would it be effective to try to switch manufacturers, for example, dryers, to retrofit their equipment or their appliances to prevent this? And then we talked a little bit about supply chain, how that's really complicated and that we're really getting somewhere along with going towards the reducing the one-time use to-go products. And that was where we ran out of time. But I would like to say, as scientists, I know we are seeing a lot of the packaging from one-time use products entering. That's all along the top 10 most found litter. But we as scientists, we can still order things that come in styrofoam. I know this in Maine, I'm in Maine right now, and we banned styrofoam, except I can walk into a laboratory at the University of Maine and there's lots of styrofoam everywhere. So we really need to try to spearhead it, even if it's not our styrofoam that's clogging up the beaches because we're not taking it and going to the beach and putting it there, as somebody might with a to-go drink, but we can still, lead with our efforts and try to look at reducing what we get for packaging. I didn't even get to say that to that group, so I got to say that to everyone else, but it was a great discussion. Thank you everyone for chiming in.
No, I totally agree about the frustration with single-use packaging, and it's still sometimes being styrofoam. Even in Corvallis, we still use styrofoam at some restaurants and it takes you by surprise sometimes. Does anyone else have feedback from their group? Thank you so much, Ariadne. That was fantastic.
I could chime in. I think I was in group 6. This is Anna.
Wonderful.
Soundkeeper. We just barely got into the third question, really didn't do anything substantive on it, other than that, there were some people who were involved with university research. Nora was there with the work that they do at the Seattle Aquarium. I work with the Soundkeeper Alliance, where we do community science. We have, we basically talked very, very high level. We didn't get into the weeds yet. Didn't have time to get into the weeds yet, but we primarily, consider, like, there were some of us that, I think Emily was saying that she grew up in a landlocked state and didn't really know about this as an issue until she moved to the coast. I didn't know about it myself until I saw videos in the mid-90s of fledgling birds dying in their nests and being opened up and filled with plastic. We recognize that that this is a global issue, but it has a very local perspective, because we can see the pollution that we find. Nora was mentioning that when we were talking about prioritizing plastics, we were talking about the research that we do Nora says that in the work they do at the Seattle Aquarium, they're mostly finding microfibers because they're working with the water column. The same is true for us in our community science. We're doing grab samples of water and we're just focusing on microplastics, but that's not necessarily the thing we should focus on because it depends on what you look at, where you see the problem. So it's just kind of a snapshot of some of the discussions we were having.
Thank you. And no worries if people didn't have time to get to all the prompts. We were a little bit short on time. It won't be graded. So these are all fantastic. I love this feedback and all the discussions you were able to have. It looks like we have time for one more group to report back before we welcome Senator Merkley at 9. Would anyone else like to chime in, discuss what you talked about in your group?
Jump in for the third question.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we were in group 2. We just were able to talk briefly about it, but we were discussing shortly how a big part of the discussion that's usually missed in talking about policy is factors like accessibility and cost. So it's always a difficult concept for me because it's easy to say, I'm from a city that was really trying to wrestle with the idea of banning single-use plastics altogether. And I'm from upstate New York, but ultimately it was kind of realized that that's not really an option, and it's kind of disregarding a troubling amount of marginalized peoples and communities that can't afford alternatives. So for example, I know countries like Belize, who are ranked very highly in the world in sustainability, prioritize the economy and the well-being of its citizens in order to achieve sustainability and knock down, emission costs, plastic use, because a fundamental part of achieving sustainability, plastic alternatives and all that is to implement policies first that help remediate poverty and other factors that restrict these communities. Because in reality, people who are struggling to feed their families and get well-paying jobs are just simply not going to have the space to prioritize, plastic alternatives, buying reusable, tumblers and food containers and other things like that. So I think that needs to be a pretty big part of our conversation as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that factored in even more since the pandemic began, with people struggling so much during the pandemic, job losses, illness. And so when you're prioritizing things for your family, recycling and reducing plastic waste doesn't always come up on top when you're really stressed out about just basic needs. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Well, let's go ahead, and if people need a 2-minute break before we start with the next segment of our conference, if you need a bio break, please go ahead and take one. And at this point, we're keeping an eye out, and Senator Merkley should be joining us in a few minutes. So thank you all for your discussions and awesome feedback. Good morning, Senator. Can you hear us? I'll give you a few minutes. Good morning, Senator. Can you hear us? It looks like you just joined. Welcome to the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics teleconference this morning, or this afternoon.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you. No, it always takes a few minutes. We're really honored to have you this morning. Thank you so much for taking time out from your busy schedule. Just to quickly introduce our group, the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics. We're a research group here dedicated to conducting reliable science-based research to uncover the risks associated with micro and nanoplastic particles. And we're mainly focused on aquatic life, and we're a group of about 200 different academic and government and nonprofit and industry sector organizations that have come together, and we have quarterly teleconferences to discuss different aspects of the plastic pollution challenge. And we're really excited to hear from you this morning. To introduce you to the group, since his arrival in 2009, Senator Merkley has been one of the Senate's foremost champions for protecting the environment, taking on the threat of climate change, ensuring a livable world for all. He's won bipartisan support to boost the Green Climate Fund, used his seat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to promote American climate leadership on the global stage. He's led the fight in the Senate against Arctic drilling and is a leading voice both in Washington and throughout the country for the need to transition from fossil fuel sources of electricity to renewable sources. And he's joining us today because he's also the Senate's leader for taking on the plastic pollution crisis. Earlier this year, the senator introduced the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act in the Senate to end our reliance on single-use plastics, and worked with his Republican colleague, Senator Murkowski, to ban single-use plastics from his Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies. So everyone, please join me in welcoming really one of the biggest anti-plastic pollution champions in the U.S. Senate. And thank you, Senator Merkley, and I am going to go ahead and give you the stage.
Well, greetings, Doctor, and thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for your work on endocrine disruptor compounds on ecosystems, which is very, very relevant to the challenges we face with plastic. And greetings to all of you in the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics, Oregon State University, Zero Waste Washington, Seattle Aquarium, everyone who's on this call being involved in different ways, because plastics are not really recognized by the American public yet in all the ways that they challenge our ecosystems and challenge our health. And so there's a tremendous amount of work to be done here. And as I was preparing for this call earlier, I was thinking about the scene from the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. And those of you who are 30 or younger, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but the person says to Hoffman's character, there's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Well, you think about it. And well, here we are thinking about it, but we're not thinking about the great future. We're thinking about the great challenge of plastics. And since Nora kicked off today's gathering talking about the Seattle Aquarium's work, I thought I'd start by just sharing some thoughts on oceans. When I'm over on the coast of Oregon, which I'm there pretty regularly, and I look out at the Pacific, it's really hard for me to comprehend that human activity has actually changed the character of the ocean, that it's a lot warmer, that it's a lot more acidic. We certainly have the additional challenge of plastic in the ocean on top of all of that. Every day, mountains of plastic pollute our seas, our rivers, our lakes, our waterways. Thousands of seabirds, sea turtles, seals, marine animals die from ingesting plastic, and so many of us, just probably everyone has seen the pictures where the sea life is sliced open. You see their gut just full of plastic, or they're getting tangled up in plastic fishing nets, and so on and so forth. Fish in the Pacific Northwest, so off the coast of Oregon and Washington, ingest about 12 to 24,000 tons of plastic every year. 60% of seabirds have ingested plastic. It's estimated by 2050, every single seabird, half the sea turtles worldwide will have ingested plastic. And why is that happening? Why is all this plastic ending up in the ocean? You know, the plastic industry likes to say, hey, we've got recycling for plastics. You have those blue bins, and not a big problem. Let's do a little better on reduce, reuse, recycle. But the reality for plastics isn't reduce, reuse, recycle. The reality is it's burned, buried, or borne out to sea. So it's the 3 B's rather than the 3 R's. And it's not just the fish and birds that are being impacted by this crisis. Every one of us, through microplastics that make their way up the food chain into what we eat and what we drink, is being affected. And the estimate is that each of us ingest about the equivalent of a credit card worth of plastic every week. Well, that's a pretty big deal when it comes to our health. And it's certainly a big deal when we think about the chemicals that are in that plastics. And that's a good referral back to the work that you're doing, Dr. Brander, on endocrine disruptors. I think we have to learn a lot more about the impacts and how is it affecting not, well, certainly the whole ecosystems, but certainly our direct health. Is it tied to breast cancer and prostate cancer and so on and so forth? So a lot of work to be done, but it can't be healthy. I don't think anybody in America would like the idea that each of us and our children are ingesting a credit card worth of plastic full of chemicals. So we also have the problem of single-use plastic, single-use bottles discarded in our lakes and rivers. I was out on jogging along the Anacostia last year near Washington, D.C., and I came to an area where just like there was a bit of an island and the river was high enough, the plants were sticking up out of the water rather than being on dry land. And it was just every square inch was filled with bottles. And of course, that's another part of the challenge of these lumps of plastics being swept down our rivers and out to sea. Well, I'm so pleased that all of you are working on these issues from many different directions, because we have to blow the alarm, ring the alarm bell on how plastics, and especially plastic production, are affecting the larger climate crisis. And that other piece doesn't always get the attention. Remember that plastics are made from oil and natural gas. And so that natural gas system, it leaks massive amounts of methane. Far more effective in trapping heat over 20 years or 100 years than carbon dioxide. So it has a big impact. The estimate is about 25 times more potent pound for pound in trapping heat over a 100-year period. And we just keep producing a chain of plastic that's producing methane, and when it's burned, carbon dioxide, it's big trouble. And here we're on the eve of Glasgow. I just came from a meeting with John Kerry where we're talking about the work that America is doing, and America certainly is trying to help bring the whole world to this tragedy of the commons on climate crisis, while producing plastic is an enormous part of the problem. And just during the last 60 years, the estimate is the world has produced about 8 billion tons of plastic. And that's a lot. And of that 8 billion, it's estimated that 6 billion of it has become plastic waste. So not recycled, burned, buried, or borne out to sea. And then there's those blue bins we throw our plastic bottles into. And the fact is, we're not really recycling, we're wish cycling. It's like a wishing well. We're throwing it in there, and you're wishing it's going to be recycled, but it's not going to be recycled. Just 8% of the plastic goes into the blue bins, actually gets recycled. So we have to probe past the first level to see what's really happening. And in institution after institution, and I think it's actually true here in the US Senate as well, you have bins separating recycled goods, and they're blue. There's one here in my office. And actually they're just all put into the same trash bin at the end of the day. It's a phony, make us feel good system. So we have to really work at the details behind the facade. And this challenge is going to get bigger because the plastics world is trying to triple its production over the next 3 decades. It's on pace to account for 1/5 of all oil consumption in the world, to account for 1/2 of all natural gas usage. So in a world where we have to quit using oil and natural gas, this is a big problem. It's not sustainable, it's not acceptable, and we have to address that piece. And Dr. Brander referred to my bill, Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. It's an effort to take the best ideas, many of which have been done at the local or state level, and incorporate them into a single bill to tackle this challenge. The bill includes a national bottle bill to greatly amplify recycling. Well, in Oregon, we had the first bottle bill, and I think still the most effective one that recycles about 90% of our bottles. And they don't just get returned, 90% returned, but they actually get converted into additional material. So it's 90% are in a closed loop. Needs to be 100%, 90% is the best in the nation. In states that do not have a deposit on their bottles, some of them are as low as 15% in terms of bottles being returned. And we're not even sure that's getting, well, not just burned or buried, rather than recycled into new products. The bill requires big corporations to shoulder responsibility for addressing pollution from their plastic crates, plastic in their packing products, or plastic in their actual product. It requires them to design and finance waste and recycling programs. Several states like Maine and Oregon now have extended producer programs that are underway, and will give us a lot of feedback on what works. We take on the construction of new plastic production plants, put a pause on them. These plants are always cited in fence line and frontline communities that provide a high level of pollution for those communities. And that's an environmental injustice issue. And so we need to really study any new plant and its impact on environmental justice. Single-use plastic, we need to replace it with alternative products. I was always struck in Oregon how every time we passed a law, the industry said it's impossible, it can't be done. We had a bill to get rid of flip tops, because the flip tops were coming off and animals were eating them. Industry said, "Oh my goodness, nobody will buy our products anymore because they won't be able to open their cans." The date that bill went into effect was the date that flip tops that stayed attached to the can came out. And so on and so forth. So legislation drives solutions. Industry responds. They find a way. We've got to eliminate this huge stream of single-use plastics. It's really hard to get through a day for any of us without using single-use plastics. You go to McDonald's and get handed coffee through the window, they're going to have a plastic cup on it. You get on the airplane, they're going to give you a plastic cup to hold your plastic containers holding a half and half, and then they'll give you a plastic stir stick. And you can turn it down, fine, but that doesn't change the system in any significant way. So we have to change the system. And in the process, we can create a lot of good paying American jobs. This is not a battle between the economy and the environment. So that's a sense of that bill. We need to also look at taking individual pieces of it and doing individual bills. A standalone national bottle bill is an example. Another example is a standalone bill on keeping microfibers out of our waste systems by modifying how new washing machines are made. I mean, most of us probably didn't even realize that microfibers were a problem from washing machines five years ago, but so much of our clothing is made from plastic. We may call it nylon or Dacron or something else, but it's plastic. And about flushable wipes? Well, they're not flushable. They're plastic. They shouldn't be flushed. They shouldn't be in our system. And so we can put a stop to that. So we can do individual bills on individual pieces that create problems. Over the last decade, the Marine Conservation Society in the United Kingdom has seen the amount of wet wipes found around the coastline grow by 400%. I actually had a challenge in, I had a new housemate here in DC who wiped down his room with these wipes and then proceeded to flush them, clog up the sewer. And the result is my basement got flooded with sewage. I was not too happy about it. So let's not flush these things. I can bring a little personal experience to that. What about plastic bags? Well, our bill addresses plastic bags, the big bill, but what about a smaller bill? Does that have a better chance? Can we build on the experience of cities and states? Today, 8 states have banned those single-use plastic bags completely. Others have enacted fees for using them. That's greatly decreased the use of them. So let's build on that experience. Keep working the state level, the county level, the city level. Those experiences help build national momentum, and a national conversation helps create momentum for local action. So the two really work well together. Well, going back to that quote from The Graduate, there's a great future in plastics. Think about it. That was the end of the quote. Think about it. Well, for the sake of our planet and our people, all of us need to do a lot of thinking about plastics. And we need to realize that there's really no great future in plastics. There's great danger, there's great trouble, there's pollution in many forms that affect human health and affect our ecosystems. And we have to break the cycle of plastic pollution. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
Senator Merkley, thank you so much for joining us today and for all of the great work that you're doing and trying to push forward at the federal level. We greatly appreciate hearing your perspectives. I also appreciate that you brought up the movie The Graduate. I had not seen that until a couple of years ago, and someone recommended that I watch it. And so now I get that joke when people refer to it. But let's.
And Dr. Was my video off that whole time?
It was, but that's okay. We could hear you.
Well,
we could hear you just fine. It's
and
all
here
right.
I had a beautiful picture of South Sister in the background to inspire us to action. So
Yeah.
my apologies for that.
No worries. That's a lovely background. Yeah, perfect. Well, let's go ahead and open the floor to questions. And it looks like Dr. Harper has the first one. So I'll let her go ahead.
Senator Merkley, thank you for joining us today. I have a question about optics. So I'm thinking about, I watch a lot of the news and see Congress, Senate, and the House having their meetings, and everybody has a water bottle. And that seems like an environment in which you could influence, at least for the optics of having, glasses that could be reused and that kind of stuff. So I just wanted your thoughts on that. And I appreciate everything that you're doing for plastics pollution.
You bet. Point taken. The subcommittee that I chair on appropriations, my partner in that is Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. And she's also very much interested in taking on plastics. She knows the damage done. So we banned those bottles from our meeting. We just put out an announcement. You want water? Bring your water bottle with you. Advertise your home state. I got Oregon Tech here. And no one complained. And I can tell you, we actually, the Environment Committee used to do water jugs and glasses until COVID. And then we were advised not to. And I have talked to the chair about reestablishing that. There's no reason now that we can't just say to people, bring your own water. I was very struck about how some of my colleagues insisted it would be outrageous for people to plug their electric cars in here at work. And in Oregon, I have a Bolt that's with a B, and so it has a sizable battery. But here I have a hybrid that only has a small battery. And so if I can put in 20 miles into it, it's a lot. 20 miles basically is 50 cents worth of energy. And yet they're complaining about that. Some of my colleagues are complaining about that. That's terrible. But they're handing out free water bottles all over the place. It costs a hell of a lot more than that. So, hey, better that we provide a few electrons for convenience than water bottles. So And by the way, I found in my research, as I tried to prepare to drive this point and eliminate plastic water bottles, that the House, before I was here, under a 2-year period, did ban them. And they survived. And then the leadership changed in the House and they ended that. And I was able to get the cafeteria here to start putting out an option on water bottles that is a cardboard water container. And Alaska Airlines is now serving that in first class. So, you know, here we go. It's the first class treatment. Well, let's give the first class treatment to everyone.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
I should clarify, by the way, I don't get those cardboard water bottles because I don't fly first class. So people are going, wait, Jeff, you're not, but I did notice what they're using. And I encourage them to extend that to the rest of us.
We have one question in the chat. Does the Break Free from Plastic Act have any proposals for tire rubber pollution?
No, but it is actually a great question. What we have found is that a huge impact on many of our fish and fish runs is caused after a rainstorm washes tire particles into the river. And there is a chemical in the tires that is used to make the rubber last longer. And I'm trying to get research on, is this cosmetic? Is it, how big a deal is it? When do they start putting this chemical in? What is the story about this chemical and why does it have to do such damage? And so I'm in the research phase, and if anyone can bring research to bear, please connect with my team so we can learn more and think about how we might be able to drive a conversation over tire dust, tire rubber.
Well, we have a couple of papers coming out of Suzanne and I's research here, so we'll be sure and share those with you. We have a
Great.
question.
We'll give you a channel to share that with all the senators up here to help educate them, because most have never heard of the tire rubber problem.
Yeah, and we have a science communication group that works as part of the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics, so we can give you a layman's version of the scientific data as well.
Great.
Ariadne?
Yes. So that was such a great question about tire particles, because we had a discussion earlier about how they're found quite frequently. So I'm a marine scientist. I became a small business owner of a startup called Paramount Planet Product to make marine compostable fish-friendly packaging. And you're talking about how the plants need to be studied for their influence on the communities they're in is really striking a chord with me, because I study this a lot, because as I manufacture, I want to make sure that manufacturing has like an actual plant, it cleans the environment as it grows. So I really want, and this is I think a powerful message that we can communicate to oil producers and other manufacturers of the sort. And I just wanted to know if you had any opinions on how to best approach businesses we may think of as polluters with a message that they can save money by not polluting. Of course, backing that up with data and monetary values. But if you have any advice for a startup making packaging in the cleaner environment, I would love to hear it.
Well, I'm not a marketing expert, although I do try to influence producers in all these conversations, and being able to lay out in a clear format how they can benefit, how there's a win-win is, you've already suggested that in your comments, is highly beneficial. They will, in their mind, they're thinking, if I do something that costs me money, my competitor is going to get an edge up on me, and they're going to be able to sell for less, and I'm going to lose market share. Well, that they don't want to do that, and they don't want to lose profit. Sometimes you will find that producers saying, we would love to do what you're suggesting, but you've got to do it through a regulation or a law so that all of us have to do it. So we're not at a disadvantage to our competitor. When you can show that they would actually save money, then they're like, oh, well, that's a different story completely, because obviously that means they get a bigger profit margin, or they could lower their costs and lower their price and gain market share. And that makes them very happy. And we've seen this a lot on energy issues. Energy costs money. So a lot of times energy saving strategies return a positive cash flow to companies. So adopting that similar strategy with the chemicals or ingredients, the packaging makes sense to me.
Those are some great advice. And I'm just wondering, even to get into the door so that you're able to give these talks, do you have any, because they might seek you because you're a senator, so they'll find you. But for me, I'm finding them. And of course it's Google or going to online conferences in the time of COVID. But how would you even get to the door if you had any thoughts on that?
Well, if it's a company in your home state, then get your home state representatives or your national representatives to call them up. I can certainly do that in Oregon. I can call up a company and say, hey, these individuals have ideas to discuss with you and get your perspective. And would you please meet with them? And generally, they will do so.
Warm introduction.
Yep.
Ezra, it looks like you have your hand up. I'll let you go ahead and ask the final question. I just got a note that there are a series of votes up and that the senator needs to potentially depart in a few minutes, but go ahead.
Well, thank you for your time, Senator Merkley. I'm wondering how you are thinking about regrettable substitutions and avoiding them. So oftentimes we see there's a problem with a chemical, or in this case, a whole host of different chemicals, plastics, and we replace it with something else that then turns out to be just as or even more problematic than the original thing. So as an example, for single-use plastics, we're frequently replacing them with paper products that are treated with things like PFAS, forever chemicals, which are also very toxic and not necessarily a solution, just a different problem. So I'm wondering how the Break Free from Plastics bill is set up to keep us from just running headfirst into a new environmental problem.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And before I came to the Senate, there was work on biofuels that sent us down a terrible direction. What it did was make palm oil highly valuable. And in the time since 2008, when that was done till now, massive tracts of jungle have been plowed under to do palm oil plantations. And I've had my team working to try to find out how do we undo the damage that was created. But once you have an industry and momentum, you have a big problem trying to reverse it, because they have lawyers who work 24/7, and they have lobbyists who work 24/7, and they have public media campaigns to influence how people think about things. And they make campaign donations, and some of them make dark money donations where they run horrific attack ads that are just the nastiest things in the world. So it's much better to think about this up front. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is find out what are the proper substitutes that, as we look carefully at their life cycles, so that we don't stumble from one bad place to another. And you mentioned PFAS, and PFAS has a really horrific story in our homes, because the cigarette industry put accelerators into their cigarettes that made them continue burning, so people would fall asleep and their couch cushions would catch on fire and their house would burn down. So instead of changing their accelerants, they said, what we need is fire retardants in all of our carpets and upholstery and children's pajamas. And what is that chemical? It's PFAS. So when I was in the state legislature, we were trying to ban PFAS, because think of your little baby crawling along the rug, breathing in PFAS, for their noses rubbing right on the carpet. I mean, it's really terrible. But it turns out PFAS has a ton of similar chemicals in the family, and so if you ban one, the industry says, well, we'll just add an atom here or there, and now we've got one of the 16 cousins and to PFAS, and we'll use that. And so it requires a lot of the sort of scientific understanding and information and vetting of alternatives. We here in Congress, we're not scientists, so we need your all frontline knowledge and help identifying suitable replacements, and therefore how to write legislation that will prevent us from having, I hadn't heard that term before, but I like it, that you use regrettable substitutes. Let's work together to prevent that from happening. And Caitlin on my team, keep feeding her information on the good substitutes so we can figure out how to make that happen. I got to say, there must be a way, there must be a product out there that is far better for the environment that will keep coffee from spilling out of my cup.
Agree. We have enough smart people working on the problem, I think, that we'll get there eventually. And I realize that you're short on time and need to leave. My big question is just kind of along the same lines as Ezra's. Is how do we avoid, or how do we integrate solutions to plastic pollution with solutions to climate change? And just thinking about the bigger picture, and that instead of just going after these single solutions to plastic pollution and to reducing single-use products, how do we think about the greater problem with fossil fuel use and the fact that oil companies are slowly shifting to plastic pollution? And you alluded a little bit to this in your remarks, but how do we sort of tackle this problem together and bring in, and in that way we have more people focused on it, maybe if we unite those two
Well, that's a really big question, and
I know.
let's spend the next few years working on that. But certainly, when we use plastics in any form, it's driving oil and natural gas, which are causing climate problems. When we burn it, it's creating a climate problem. On both ends, the production side and the destruction side, it's a big player, and we've got to have people come to understand that, because right now people think a little bit more. They're hearing about microplastics a little bit. They've been aware of the problem of marine life eating plastic. They don't like the bottles floating down their rivers, but they really don't have. There isn't a public sense, and certainly not a sense among congressionals that plastics is a climate challenge. Pay attention to what happens in Glasgow and how little plastics will probably be talked about. There will be exceptions. There will be people who do raise it, but I'm suspecting not very much. And that has to change if we're going to create that connection and create the momentum to solve that challenge.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for addressing that question. I realize that answer could be an hour long or more. So, and great.
Yeah, and one way for us to advance that conversation is cities and counties are doing climate plans, and they're thinking about things like, oh, how do we convert our vehicles? How do we convert how we heat our building to a heat pump? Can we sign up for green electrons so that the electricity coming in, we're promoting electricity made from renewables? Can we insulate our building better? Can we change our hot water system that's on natural gas? All right, they're thinking about those things. Those are all great, but inserting into those conversations, there's several nonprofits that are helping support and facilitate those conversations on local climate plans. And where's the plastics chapter? How are plastics going to fit into this? So that's one way. And then also in the national plans, when we have John Kerry giving a speech on climate, how do we get him to talk about plastics as part of part of the problem. I know there's resistance because it's like, oh, yeah, that's a whole nother powerful industry. Do I really want to bring them in as an opponent at this point, or should we kind of ignore that until later? I think we have to not ignore it till later. It's a big part of the issue, and over time it'll get harder and harder as that industry gets larger and larger and more powerful. Let's challenge our local leaders and our national leaders to talk about plastics.
Wonderful, thank you. And we may have time for one more question. I know we had quite a, and if we don't, let me know if you need to go.
I am told I do not. I do not.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to call it here, but thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
All right, we completely understand, and thank you so much for your time today. And have a wonderful week, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. All right, take care now.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for your excellent questions for the senator. Did anyone have anything you wanted to sort of break down a little bit more, or talk a little bit about related to Senator Merkley's remarks and how they align with the presentations from Heather Trim and Nora Nickum earlier, since we have a little bit of extra time left? And my understanding was that the senator was pulled away for some important votes. If you've been following the news, there's a lot of action on Capitol Hill right now. So, Stace, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question. This kind of relates to one of the questions that was already asked, and maybe it's just a point that they don't say, Senator Merkley doesn't say much about Oregon's lack of recycling program. We don't have the capabilities to have mixed recycling like they do in a lot of states. I'm wondering how they deal with this in Washington, in Seattle, that they've actually set up some or supplemented some nice plastics recycling centers. So I didn't hear any of that from the senator. So I'm just wondering if anybody else has an idea for improvements that could be made, maybe looking at Washington as an example.
I can at least take a first stab on that. So the new law that has been passed in Oregon is groundbreaking, and at some point maybe you'd like to have a presentation about the new extended producer responsibility law for Oregon, which is going to be it's going to be groundbreaking in terms of really making it so people can recycle everything. And many of the features that are in the Washington bill and in the Break Free from Plastic Act that Senator Merkley is leading are in the Oregon bill. So it's just going to take a few years. These are big systems changes. There's a few years of preliminary work. There's a committee that's being set up right now. In fact, they're soliciting for committee members right now in Oregon for that. The issue of mixed and dual stream and single stream and even triple stream in terms of recycling is a very interesting issue. And like, what do you let go to the recycling facility versus what you don't? And a good example is glass. So glass, when it goes in the trucks, gets shattered into little, they crush everything in the trucks so they can put more in the trucks. You get little shards. Those shards then get into everything, especially the paper and also in the plastic and everything else. So in some material recovery facilities, MRFs, they are able to do a very good job on glass, but in many they don't. And in many jurisdictions, they don't let you even put glass in that commingled bin at your curb or in your bin. So there's like, we could go commodity by commodity in terms of various challenges. But good news is you do have a new groundbreaking law in Oregon that will help a lot, but it's going to take a few years to kick in.
Thanks so much, Heather. That is refreshing to hear. And I think that our group would love to hear more about the Oregon specific one. So we'll follow up with you.
I'm wondering, because we're seeing bills from both California and from Washington about changing the symbols on the bottoms of plastic products. How does that, is there a way for that to work from the bottom up? And you can't just be doing that in each individual state necessarily. How does that work? over the long run is my question. That might not be an easy one to answer.
No, this is a critical question, actually. So California just passed a law that says, that's called Truth in Labeling, which says that a manufacturer cannot put a symbol on a recycling symbol on their product unless it actually meets a threshold, which they're going to determine in California. But basically, it's a 60% of the recycling facilities will take it. And so for your number 1 and number 2 bottles, that'll be no big deal. But when you get up into the 3 to 7 plastics, that's going to become very problematic. And Oregon has a task force that you've set up with your new law. So you're going to address it that way. And we are looking to incorporate California's truth in labeling law in our Washington bill. It is going to be litigated immediately. There are going to be all sorts of lawsuits in California. And one of the issues, for example, is when you put that recycling symbol on other things, like, for example, batteries. So a lot of batteries nowadays have those little chasing arrows on it. That is very confusing to the public because we do not want people to put the batteries in the recycling system. That is not where they go. They need to be taken to a special drop-off. So that's just one example of where there's some significant confusion, but there's going to be massive litigation in California and then it will settle out. So we're hoping to kind of align the West Coast so that at least the producers who are producing for our 3 states are all going to be doing the same thing. That's, I think, where this will land out eventually.
That's great. At least it's a start to solving that challenge. There's a long way to go, and we appreciate your efforts on that. So sometimes I feel like the job of researchers is easy. We just get to point out the problems, but then we're like, okay, how do we fix this? It's a much harder challenge for sure. Does anyone else have any questions for Heather or Nora, or just general comments about the senator's remarks? Go ahead.
I have a question. Feel free to cut me off. I could talk about this stuff forever. But Heather, I just wanted to build on what you're talking about, how you're working on getting a coastal wide labeling system. And I know that's really great, typically because, there's a lot of people in California and up to Washington, and there's more people than over on the East Coast. And if I were to count like 3 states, I'm up in Maine. So if I did my 3 bordering states, we wouldn't even touch California like by percentage. So that's great that you're starting with the really populated places, because then that forces the companies that are selling to them to change, and it already ekes over to the nation. But somebody who's over on the East Coast, even despite our population lack, probably because winter is coming, I was wondering if you have any advice on how we actually did just pass an EPR bill, the extended producer responsibility. So that's not anything about labeling, but how can I take what you're doing over there and bring it over here, be a support, wait in the wings? Any advice?
Well, no silver bullet here, but I think California may have led the country on this. And so once it gets litigated, I think in the end, what comes out of that may be eventually adopted by the feds. But in the meantime, you could introduce a bill in Maine to say the same thing as California. I think the more we align, the better, because the industry will have, they have a very good point, which is they don't want to have different products for different states. And so if we can just get it the same everywhere with that very strong standard, the main thing is reducing the confusion for the consumer.
So Heather, that was a great point, that we should have the same legislation in different states that do that to block voting. Why not to protect against plastics? You'd think there would be, I don't think we have quite as much money as the people who are into the voting rights deals.
I'm sorry, I don't think I couldn't understand.
So Heather, I didn't really ask a question.
Okay.
It was a statement.
Great.
If you want to have same labeling across the states, you can do the same thing the people who are against voting rights do.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
They actually write the legislation and hand it off to the legislators and then go on with that. So being from the South, I pay a lot of attention to that. And it's a very common thing that's done for certain political aspects and decision-making, but not for others.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a question for everyone. How do we even know if any of these things are going to help? Because when, of course, Suzanne's been involved on a committee in California, and I reviewed stuff for them. And there's one in Maryland that communicates with me and so forth. They don't have frameworks in which to decide what thing is going to be good. And sorry, when you get above a certain age, you get email, you get phone calls all during the day asking, especially for Medicare Part, whatever, it's that time of year. Sorry about the phone. So how do we actually know if this is going to help? How can we actually demonstrate to someone what the cost benefit is going to be, and if we're actually going to reduce the impact to the environment? Or are we taking this on faith? And I'm not very good on taking things on faith, being a risk assessor and a scientist. So how do we do that? How do you sell this, Heather? Or is it?
Well, I'm going to let Nora, if she's still there, answer it. I mean, I do have an answer, but I think Nora would have the same answer as me.
Right.
Nora,
right.
you there?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I can't see Nora, so here we go.
Heather, but I mean, there's lots of data being collected all over the place, and we'll be looking to that. So things like what's being found on beaches now that we've passed these laws in Washington State, and how is that changing over time? And then there are studies from California after they passed their bag bill, thin plastic bag use went down by over 70%. So we do need to be doing those kinds of studies, but I think, you know, reducing plastics at the source just kind of hopefully has to reduce it later in the chain, because there's less of it to get out there. But we are looking to researchers and you know, out in the field, and economists and surveys and so on, to try to make the point and understand what's working well.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit. You know, everyone likes to say researchers. I get this all the time at university. Oh, why don't you just have a graduate student do that? I calculate to have a graduate student for a year now runs about $70,000. So without the bucks, there is no Buck Rogers, right? And I do not see this research being funded in a fashion compared to what we did for chemicals and so forth. I also don't see it coordinated. Every time I write a paper, it's like, boy, it'd be great to have all this kind of data, but there's not an organized methodology for going through and investigating these things, like there has been for other stuff. And of course, the impetus for that was the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and so forth. We don't have anything comparable. We don't have a CERCLA that deals with this like we did for contaminated sites. If you had a contaminated site with lots of microplastics, how would you determine the level that would be safe, the level that would be applicable under CERCLA to drive a cleanup? Well, I don't see that we're anywhere near getting there from where we are right now. Maybe you guys have different experiences, but to me, I've been across, you gotta remember, I've been at this a really long time. Maybe I'm just wearing down.
And I definitely can see your point, and there are never enough research dollars to go around, and we're all doing our best to keep our labs afloat, and things do keep getting more expensive. But I do see a lot of movement towards funding more research on microplastics and nanoplastics, at least in Europe and in Asia as well. I know one of the working groups I'm in for California was focused on drinking water and trying to come up with a method to monitor microplastics in drinking water. And so a lot of the focus was on papers coming out on drinking water studies in mammalian models, and mostly in mice and rats. And the number of papers that have come out just over the past 2 years, I mean, there's just been this exponential increase in the research, and admittedly a lot of that is coming out of Asia, and then we're starting to see more research coming out of Europe, and the hope is that, you know, agencies like the NIH will follow suit to start funding more research in that area. But it's definitely a concern, and you know, but I also kind of feel like that's always been, there's never quite been enough research money to fund everything we want to do, but we get there eventually.
Yeah, Suzanne, because I think most people know this, but you and I and Stacy all work together on the same NSF grant. So I'm just doing this for bring out the points. And Sean just wrote a note to everyone. we're trying to move to standardized methodologies. Standard methodologies are sweet, but the problem is if they're not addressing the proper question, you have a standard methodology that's not answering the question. And I've seen this in chemicals and other kinds of things for a long time. So unless we're addressing specific questions, I don't see those written down very clearly. Having a standard methodology, it's like a type 3 error in statistics. You got the first two. To type 3 error is I did the statistical test really well, but didn't answer the question I had. When we try to do risk assessment, I'm going, oh gosh, that's so frustrating. That was a really nice study. In no way does it address the specific question we need to calculate the risk. So that's, that's a little frustrating. Yeah.
Sure. No, I understand. And maybe I have to be more optimistic because I have 25 more years to go.
Yes.
So, see. Casey, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a good question in the chat. How do we pressure the petroleum industry to be responsible for funding this research? And I think Heather had spoke to actually moving the onus to industry, the people that are manufacturing them, to make sure that there is more of a circular economy. Is Heather still on, or Nora, can you speak to that?
I'll see if Heather wants to join in, but with our extended producer responsibility legislation, that is exactly trying to get producers to pay for more of these things along the way, the recycling infrastructure, and so on. And there are things like needs assessments that would be in the legislation to better understand what the gaps are. And I think we can look at whether those can include things like research gaps.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we are getting close to 10 o'clock, so should probably start to think about closing things down. So happy to hear these fantastic discussions, and thank you to all of the great speakers today. Sorry that Senator Merkley isn't here to hear the second round of thank yous. But as we are getting towards the end of the meeting, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements for upcoming meetings. This coming month, and it's just a few weeks away at this point, somehow November is almost here, we have CTAC SciCon 4 coming up, and this meeting was originally going to be in Portland, but was moved to completely virtual due to ongoing concerns about the pandemic. And on this slide, I've highlighted these sessions, the live sessions, and times that those will be meeting. And there's basically a session on micro or nanoplastics every day of the meeting. And these particular sessions will feature live over Zoom discussions of the recorded talks. And in some cases, there will be shorter sort of lightning presentations from some of the presenters in those sessions. And then there will also be a topical mixer on Wednesday afternoon. All of these times are in Pacific, since it is it was originally going to be a Portland meeting. And so there's a microplastics interest group topical mixer on Wednesday of the meeting from 3 to 4:30 PST, which should be a lot of fun. And then the other thing I have is a list of sessions that are going to be featured at CTAC Copenhagen. And abstracts for that meeting are due December 1st. And that meeting is currently slated to be hybrid. And so there hopefully will be an in-person component, but there will also be as many options to participate online as well. And so that opens it up to a lot more people if you don't have the funds to fly to Copenhagen in May. And those abstracts are due December 1st. And then just stay tuned for plans for the PNW Consortium. We're planning on having a joint meeting with PNW CTAC. And I believe that meeting is also planned to be virtual at this point. I'll let Stace follow up on that. And that's going to be from March 3rd through 5th. And our consortium meeting will be on one of those days.
Yeah, so Suzanne, it will be virtual. We've gone to that, and ours we'll probably do it on Wednesday prior to CTAC meeting, a little bit more removed from it instead of embedded in it this year. So we can coordinate ours a little better. So.
Okay, wonderful. So lots of opportunities. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that the Ocean Sciences meeting, which is planned for March of next year, that has also just moved online. It was going to be in Hawaii, and they've moved it to virtual, which I think was a good decision given the current situation with COVID. And so I've included a link below, which, and there are at least 3, maybe 4 different sessions on different aspects of microplastic pollution at that meeting as well. So lots of virtual opportunities to stay up to date, and also to submit your own research. And then just,
There's also one in the chat from Andrew.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see the chat.
This is for the Oregon Marine Debris Action Plan virtual workshop that's going to be sponsored by the Marine Debris Program. It's happening on November 8th and 9th, and he popped a link in there to register if you'd like to by November 3rd.
Perfect.
Yeah, sorry to hijack everybody.
No worries. I'm glad you hijacked it. I didn't have that one on my radar. Perfect. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And we'll put that, we'll advertise that on social media as well, so people know about it. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We had some really great discussions. It was wonderful to hear from people leading solutions on plastic pollution from Washington and also from Capitol Hill. Thank you to our leadership team, Drs. Langdon, Landis, Harper, and again, we're based at Oregon State University as well as Western Washington. This meeting was recorded, and so we'll post it on our website in case you want to view any portions of it again, or if you have colleagues who weren't able to join us. I know there's another meeting in California this morning that a lot of people were attending, so we'll post that online, and we look forward to seeing you all online and at our next teleconference in early 2022. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.